So this is the quilt I finished this week.
Oh,
Another one of my animal set. And I used the same backing as the previous one.
Are they two of the same?
They're very close. They're not exactly the same, but they're. This is the front and I wanted to show you the back. So I flipped up a corner so you could see the backing on this one.
wow, I love it, Joyce.
What I thought I would do today is give you the instructions for a practice piece that I would like each one of you to do starting next week. I'll have supplies for you at the Senior Center on Tuesday, and let's all do this practice piece. So here's mine. I started with pieces of fabric that are about 10 inches square, more or less. It's a piece of batting and a piece on the top and a piece on the bottom. What I'm using for this demonstration is a white material and black thread so that you can see clearly what I'm doing. But when you make your own, you can choose other fabrics if you want to that would be more beautiful. And we've got lots of nice fabric at the Senior Center. So I'm making this sandwich. I've got the batting in the middle and a piece of fabric on each side, a front and a back. And now I've smoothed them out, made sure that they're together really nicely, and I've put some safety pins in to hold them. And you'll see that I'm off the corner because I want to work first on this diagonal. So I made sure that my pins are not in the way of my diagonal line. See, if I use this diagonal, those pins are right in the line. So I moved them off center. So whatever you're planning, you can figure out where you want to put your safety pins. So here we are with our quilting sandwich put together with a couple of safety pins in to hold it. And this is only a 10-inch square, so it didn't need very many safety pins. And then I'm marking it on the diagonal line. Now, this is a square, so I just went point to point, but you can use the other lines on this, on your ruler to make sure that you have the right pitch to your line. So if you want a 30-degree pitch, or if you want a 45-degree pitch, which is the diagonal, then you can check it using your ruler. And I've used a marker here so that you can see this line really clearly for the demonstration. But in real life, you would not use a marker like that because it's not going to wash out. There's my slide. You would use a marker like this, which is a chalk marker. And there are various chalk markers on the market. You can get them in different colors. These are chalk pencils that you can get, and then you just sharpen them like you would a regular pen with a regular hand pencil sharpener. Don't use too fancy a pencil sharpener because they will crumble a little bit. It's chalk. It's not graphite. There's also a mechanical one. So the one I have is a mechanical one, and they come in different colors so that you can get contrast that you can see depending on the fabric that you're using. So if you're using a black fabric, you could use a white chalk. If you're using pink fabric, you might want to use a purple or a blue or something that's going to stand out so you can see it. And then they just rub off, or they come off in the wash. They're really easy.
It's washable?
I'm sorry?
Is it washable?
Yes, it's going to wash out because you just want it temporarily until you put your stitching line in. So this is just to be a guide for this stitching line that we're going to do.
Wow, that's good.
So now I'm stitching right down my line and putting that first line of stitching in nice and straight all the way across. And now I'm going to use this spacer. We talked a little bit about it before, that behind your presser foot, there is on most machines an accessories hole. And into that hole, you can put this gadget. It's just a piece of bent wire. And I put it through the accessories hole, and now I space it. And there are some markings on the plate here on the sewing machine that will help you space it, or you can use a ruler. So here I've got a ruler. This is where my needle comes down. It's marked in red on this foot. And then I've measured 1 inch across, and here's the 1 inch line, and I set my spacer so that it's going to hang down at the 1 inch. And I'll show you how I'm going to do this. So now I set the spacer into my line of stitching, and I follow that same line of stitching. Using this line of stitching as my guide, I'm going to sew a parallel line and just keep this spacer in that parallel line all the way across. I also use gloves, and I have gloves I can share with you all. When you come next week, I'll have a present for you. So I have these plain old cotton gloves, which I've discovered work at least as well as all of the quilting gloves on the market. And they're super cheap. I think I got 50 for $10 or something like that. So I have a whole basket full, and I'll give you a pair next week. And then you throw them in the wash. So you can see I've done several quilts using these. So there's a lot of lint on them. But every once in a while I throw them in the wash. They're just plain cotton gloves.
Wash them in cold water.
No, it doesn't matter. I throw them in the laundry. I just throw them in the laundry. And that way it de-lints them. It takes all the lint off. So you can see me making parallel lines. So I made this parallel line. Now I'm going to make another one and keep going all the way across to quilt your fabric. Just make sure your path is clear. So you can see if I make another parallel line here, I'm going to run into that safety pin. So I'm going to take the safety pin out before I start stitching.
I have a good answer.
And now I've got all the parallel lines from this middle out to the point, and you can see each one gets a little shorter because of we're working on the diagonal. So now I'm going to turn it upside down and do the lines on the other side in the exact same way. So keeping my spacer along my line of stitching, make another parallel line. And again, making sure my path is clear. I'm sorry?
Is it black thread?
Yes, I'm using black thread so that you can see my lines clearly. This for the demonstration. In real life, you probably would not want to do that. You'd probably want to have stitching lines that will disappear more into your fabric.
Is that cotton thread?
Yes, it's all cotton. So now you can see I'm getting done, and here I'm getting done, and I have a lot of straggly threads along. So every once in a while I stop and I trim off all my thread ends to make sure I don't sew over them and get them caught in the stitching that I want to keep.
Don't you tie them? Do you tie the threads at the end?
No. At these ends, you don't need to worry about it at all.
Oh.
I just start and stop. I don't think about tying it off because these ends are going to get trimmed anyway. I'm going to cut right through those lines in a minute. I'll show you. So now that I've got all these in one direction, I'm going to cross hatch this. And I'm using my ruler to line it up. And you can see I've got lines on the ruler that I can use to make sure that I'm getting a 90-degree angle exactly across. Of course, I could have also chosen to do a different angle. You get to design this. This is your piece. So we're going to make parallel lines, but they could be 90 degrees off, or they could be a different number of degrees off. It's entirely up to you. It's your artistic decision. So now I've done all my cross hatching, and you can see I could maybe be making a placemat or something like that with this methodology. And you could make the spacing different. It doesn't have to be 1 inch. It could be 2 inches or 2.5 even. You remember, according to the batting, we need to keep things somewhere between 4 and 8 inches apart. to keep the batting from shifting, but that's the only real requirement that we have to worry about. But now I've got ragged edges here. I've got everything nice and flat from the middle out, but my edges are uneven and a little ragged. So I'm going to trim those. And what I do to trim it is trim 2 opposite sides and then go back and do the 90-degree sides. So you do the 2 opposite sides, A and B. And then after I've done A and B and I make sure those are nice and straight and parallel lines, then I'll go back and do C and D. Okay. So here we are cutting, and I've lined it up on the green board. So I know I have this edge is perfect. It's already been trimmed. Now I'm going to do a 90-degree edge, and I use my green board to make sure that I've got everything lined up before I cut anything. So I'm making this time perfect edges. And you can see that sometimes one of the layers of fabric is a little short. I don't know if you can see, but it ends right here, about 1/4 of an inch from the edge. So I want to make sure that when I make my straight line, I have all 3 layers of fabric visible. So I'm going to cut it something like right there. Okay, straight on the green board. These edges are straight. You can see parallel to the yellow lines, parallel to the yellow lines, and I'm cutting parallel to the yellow lines.
Is that 1/4 of an inch?
It at this point, the measurement is not so important. What's important is to make sure I'm catching good fabric at the very edge all the way across. So here the fabric is actually ending something like that. It wiggles around a little bit because it's a rough edge. So the fabric is there. I want to make sure I'm cutting into good fabric in all 3 layers.
And you don't
Now-
have to pin it.
I'm sorry, go
You
ahead.
don't have to keep it pinned.
No, it's
So
already
at this point, all this stitching is holding everything together. So I don't need pins. Okay, so the stitching is holding all 3 layers together. And now what we're doing is neatening up the edge so that when we bind it, we're binding against a nice straight edge. So now we're going to start binding, and I've chosen this fabric to be the binding. I'm cutting 2.5 inches wide. So the rule of thumb is 2 inches if you're hand binding and 2.5 inches if you're machine binding. And what I'm doing this morning is machine binding. So I cut this to 2.5 inches wide, and now I'm making that diagonal cut. We've done this before. You put all your right sides up and you put it along the 45-degree line, which is right here. And then cut all those lines diagonally, and then you put them together so they look like this, and you press the seams all in one direction. Don't open the seam, leave it closed, and that'll give you a good strong piece of fabric. So put those together, and then this is how I start. So I have already ironed this 2.5 inch piece all the way down so that the 2 layers together will be 1.25 inch piece. But now when I do my first attachment, I open that up, fold it back about 1 inch worth is what I've got here, folded it back along that diagonal line. You can see it's diagonal. And I've sewn from the end just down a couple of inches. It's not a critical measure. You just want to give it a good toe hold. So diagonal, folded, and sew just a little bit. Then I stop sewing, take it off the machine. I'm going to fold that back again. So here it's folded back again. And you can see I've made a little pocket here. We're going to use that at the end. So I started sewing about 1 inch away from the pocket. 1 inch away from the pocket. Whoops, sorry. And then I sew to the end of the line, and the end of the line when you're doing binding is about 1/8 of an inch from the edge of the fabric. So here I'm figuring there's going to be another 1/4 inch seam along this line. And I want this to be somewhere between 1/4 and 1/8 of an inch from the edge. So that, and I'll show you why in a second. It's because I'm going to fold this fabric back and make a diagonal fold. So here, this is what it looks like. So I've left a little bit of, you can see if I had sewed all the way to the end, I wouldn't be able to do this. Okay, so you want to stop short when you're sewing that edge. So this line of sewing stops before it gets to the edge. And now I'm going to fold it back from the corner. This is 45 degrees. This is 90 degrees. And then we fold this long tail back over so that now this fold is parallel with the edge of the fabric. Okay, so there's a diagonal fold here underneath that you can't see, but you can see it's turned here. And this is parallel with the edge. And I just stuck a pin in it to keep it together because now I'm going to sew all the way down that edge. And again, stop short. You don't want to go all the way to the end here because we're going to do the same thing again on this corner. So turning the corner, you stop short, you fold the big tail back, then you fold it this way again, and you get this nice, neat edge that you can line up all the raw edges together, do a nice consistent seam all the way down, and you're ready to go to the next corner. Questions about corners?
I
Right.
think we're gonna have to go out and get new batteries because this thing is dying.
Ah, okay.
All
So
right,
I'll have this recording for you. You can watch it another time.
thank you.
We'll see you next week.
Okay, take
Okay.
care.
Okay, looking forward to it.
Happy Santa.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye. So now we're at the end and you can see here's that pocket that we made originally. I've turned this last corner and just did enough to secure it. So the corner is all taken care of. I don't need to worry about that corner anymore. What I'm worried about now is finishing this connection. So I'm going to cut it off, but longer than this point. Okay, because I want to tuck it inside that pocket. So I need it to be longer than the point, but I don't need it to be 1.5 feet or whatever is really left there. So I've trimmed it off, but made sure I have enough to tuck this raw edge under my pocket. And it's going to get scooted in so that it's parallel with that point. And here it is together. So I've scooted this tail inside the pocket and lined it all up. And you can even stick a pin in it to make sure you're going to keep it. You can see these edges are not quite together. It doesn't matter as long as this point is together, where the tail sticks into the pocket. Okay, and it comes down far enough that this raw edge is caught in underneath. And now we're going to sew along that line. And it will look perfect. So now we're going to turn it and iron it. So I've turned up, this is the doubled edge, right? This is a fold that's sticking out. All the raw edges are going to get covered up now by this binding. And that's the whole objective of binding, is to cover up this raw edge and make it nice and neat on the outside. So we've turned it up. This is the wrong side of the piece. And I've turned it up and I'm pressing it neatly along. I'm going to press this corner. So you can see I've got this nice wedge here at the corner. And that wedge is going to help you make this perfect turn. So on the back, it's going to look like this. So you have this 45-degree angle coming up and making a nice mitered corner. That's called a mitered corner. And now we're coming along. We're doing the same thing on the next edge. I have my 45-degree angle here. Press it nice and crisp. And now we're going to start sewing it. Any other questions up to this point? Great. So when we go to sew it, now we've got that turned edge on the back. Remember, it looks like this on the back. And this material, you can see, is longer than 1/4 of an inch. So when we turn that back, it's going to come farther than that line of stitching, because this line of stitching is going to be the same line of stitching that we're going to do from the top to put this final bit together. So here we are now. This is the front of the piece, and we're going to sew from this point, from the inside of the mitered corner. We're going to start sewing, and we're going to sew what's called in the ditch. So we're going to begin here at this point, and we're going to travel down right in that ditch between these two pieces of joined fabric. That's called the ditch. So we're going to stitch in the ditch, and there's actually a special foot to help you with it. I have it on my machine here. You can see, I'll make it a little bigger so you can see it better. It's got this little guide thing right in the middle that you can sit right in your ditch, and it'll help you stay put there. You can also wing it. You can do this just by the vision and steering it carefully. But this foot is helpful if you have one. Here that shows another picture of this little guide right in that ditch between the blue and the green fabrics, so that it'll help keep you on track. So now I've stitched in the ditch all the way down to the end, and I'm going to stop at the inside of the mitered corner here. And then I'm going to turn the piece and fold this new side under and do it again. Okay. Now this is what it looks like from the back. You can see that the fabric extends beyond our stitching line, and that's fine. It's a turned edge, so it's not a raw edge here that's sticking out. So it looks nice and neat. But obviously black is not the best color to have chosen. If this were a real quilt, what thread would you choose?
I would go with beige.
Right, you want something that's going to basically disappear into this binding. So you wanted something that's going to match your binding material. It doesn't matter what the quilt material is. This line of stitching is going to be on the binding material. So it'll be right in the ditch next to the binding material on the front, and it'll be very visible on the back when you do machine binding. Okay. And that's my finished piece.
Oh,
Any questions about that?
no, looks good. So, but you mainly use it if you're gonna be doing what, like pot holders, placemats, something on a smaller scale. Like you only did 1 inches apart. You only did 1 inches. I know with the quilts you said it's either 4 or 6, but with you did 1 inches today, so it's mainly to do placemats.
You're right. For placemats and pot holders, 1 inch would be good. You don't have to do that. Otherwise, I thought it would be good to practice with the spacer. And so this is really just an exercise to help you learn the technique. But if you were on a big quilt, you probably wouldn't want to do the whole quilt like that.
Right.
Even if they're 3 or 4 inches apart, that may or may not be the style that you're going for. So it's only one option. I've seen people do a small piece of a big quilt with this. Maybe on one of the blocks, there's a design area where you want to do this kind of cross-hatching. But usually, yes, it's mostly for pot holders and placemats and things like that.
Oh, okay. All right. I think I can handle something small.
Okay. It makes a good practice piece, and especially, turning corners is a little tricky. So if you have a practice piece where if you mess up, it doesn't count, and then you have it as a reference, you can look back at it and say, how was it I did that? Yeah.
Oh, that's good. So, yeah, I want to practice.